Good to be back. Hello, loves of my lives. It is me, or is it is I? I never was good at grammar. You know, sometimes when it is really quiet, when everything around you stops, and when everything inside of you stops, when your thoughts, when they die down, and when all you are aware of is your breath and the beating in your chest. Sometimes, in those moments, you can still hear them. You can still hear the waves. You can still feel the ocean. You can feel the sand in between your feet, in between your toes. Sometimes, when everything lines up, that moment that you think of as bliss, contentment, joy, that moment of peace, that is what you sometimes can still feel. And that is you at home. That is you that I am standing next to right now, just a few feet from you in Honomeia, on the beaches where you entered into Ekaria as the free energy artists that you are. And here I am, once again, entering into Ekaria with you. You yourself, only a few moments ago, really, decided to once again walk down that path to that most precious of beaches, the beach of Honomeia, where in the sky, day and night, if you can speak of such a thing from that perspective, more like the iterations between dawn and dusk, the infinity signs, the beautiful works of art that you know as Ekarias shine all the time, witnessed and visited by thousands each day, if I translate it to your reality for a second, just to come and observe, just to come and have a peek. And no, we don't sell tickets. The doors and the hearts to this place are always open. And so even though you sometimes during your path may wonder what you are doing here why the hell you would come back here, why you would place yourself in this environment time and time again. I press upon your hearts the work of art and the work of beauty and the work of joy that this place truly is. So yes, it is wonderful to be back here and to be back with all of you. I am Jeshua, by the way, if I hadn't mentioned that yet. And for those that are aware of this evolving creator manifest, this diamond, that in a way we are multidimensionally unpacking, like a gift delivered to you by DHL from Amazon Prime. Unboxing, I believe you call it. Yes, that gift that is this manifest. It is wonderful to be part of it again. But for those of you that are following this more closely, you will know that in the last couple of days, the Pakwanyensan has had a little bit of difficulty preparing for my arrival. Lots of jokes were made about it. Yes, I believe I was compared to Mr. T. I believe that it was said that hunter teams were out to capture me and how difficult it was to put me down in a moment in time and space. Yes, all of those things were true. And all of those things happened, but only because it is fun. But here we are. The true reason, of course, why the Pakwanyensan and also myself have a hard, it's not the right word, a vulnerable time of this particular moment and this particular piece is because of the promise of it and the step that it truly offers. Having been aware of everything in the last few months now that has been shared with you about the pathway of sankara, today we are going to begin to take the next step on that journey. And I do understand that some may say the next step, I'm still trying to process everything that has been shared, and I'm still working with the Queen's Chamber. In fact, I'm still looking for the Queen's Chamber, let alone I'm traveling through the cloud portal. My God. Yes, that is true, but this is a multi-dimensional event. That means that one step does not per se precede the next one. It means that these things are all tied in together and all happen in a way at the same time, of course. So this is the right moment to introduce it. For those of you, again, that have been following a bit closely, you know that this piece is going to be talking a great deal about that which is labeled the pathway of vahbada. And you also know, as you have been reading, that I will be discussing something known as Ishi. Yes, those things are true. We are going to be talking about that. But before we do, I want to take you back a bit. I feel like everyone has been sharing about their past, Adamus, Ketumi, Isis, even. Well, it's time for a little bit of essential Essenes, don't you think? Yes, we're going to be going into that era. For it was probably the most important era when it came to the human exploration of the pathway of vahbada before this time that you are in now. Of course, the time that I'm talking about, just slightly over 2,000 years ago, if you want to label it with those numbers and years, which of course truly you can't. It's only a linear organization for mental effect, of course, but let's label it like that for a while. If you go back to those days, then we are of course talking about a period that is already thousands of years beyond the original presence of Isis. And yet, we too were influenced by that same source of inspiration. We too were given the access, if you will, to the portal that is Ra. Only what happened after Isis, all those thousands of years prior, opened that door to her direct personal communication. And after the experiment in what would later be truly known as Egypt would fail on the surface, it would fail at least, is that a remnant of that opening remained. And essentially, all beings since that time had and continue to have direct access to their creator self, to the higher self and all of the levels above that, all the way to the creator self. And this is what, of course, happened for me in those days. Only I did not merely speak and communicate and connect with my creator self itself, that being that you know as Ekara, of which you can look upon me as one of the expressions of Ekara's lifetimes. So therefore, the connection I had with my father, as it was translated throughout the years, is essentially a direct connection to Ekara, and via Ekara to that being that you know as Babaka, which ultimately is no different than the energy of the Solaris, the central sun, only from a slightly different Ekaraya perspective. But I'll tell you about that bit, that little detail, another time. But this is the voices that initially were coming through me due to the opening of the portal that Isis initiated together with Ra. You of course know that there is a strong link between Ekara and Ra. So from that perspective, we, in those days, were receiving the same level and type of information. Now, this started for me at a very early age, stimulated essentially by my mother. My mother, whom many of you might have heard of once or twice in your religions. People will not like to hear this, but basically was a secret Essene. Now, the Essenes today are extremely misunderstood. First of all, if you look up, and you shouldn't, because truly I asked the Pakuan Yinsan to do so recently, and anything you can find today is pure mockery and interpretation and misinterpretation, for the most part, of what was truly happening. First of all, you will learn, if you do, that the Essenes were supposedly part of a Jewish cult. Well, that is not true. First of all, we did not specifically connect with the Jewish people, nor with any other people. And I'll tell you why in a second. But this is the first thing that is often known about the Essenes, that it was an offshoot, a sort of a Jewish sect, a cult often referred to, that was separated from the original faith. But that is not what was going on. As I said, I know from experience because my mother was and is part of this grouping. What was going on, however, is that those that ended up calling themselves Essenes and finding their way to each other are those that in our day had discovered within themselves the pathway of sankara. Now, this is the point in time that you have found yourselves on recently. It is not difficult, of course, if you think about it, to find the pathway of sankara. It is not as though you have to look far and wide and in secret places to find love and joy and freedom and truth and life and gratitude and grace and well-being as concepts. Not difficult at all. It is not some hidden scripture, something that you must access through ritual or fasting or all sorts of bizarre manuals to follow. No. It is the most natural thing. And therefore, especially in those days, where people had much less going on as distractions than you do today, it became often much more natural to simply discover this pathway within the self. Very often because the pathway simply starts with love. And even though love is often seen as a conditional expression, even within conditional love, a person cannot help but find an opening to the higher truths of these states, whether they like to or not. That is namely what love does. Even conditional love is ultimately merely an inverted version of the actual ingredient, of the actual building block, the fundamental principle of life. And even at the most dimmed down level, that cannot be ignored and is going to have an effect on someone. So especially in those days, the pathway that naturally follows from love to joy to the state of freedom to a discovery of truth and life and the gratitude that comes with that, the gracefulness that one finds and the eternal state of well-being that comes with that. In other words, as you know, the spiral down through the chakras is actually a very natural one to make. There were fewer people, however, that discovered this as an actual pathway and not merely as an enormous, wonderful state of being to be in, and that was it. Some could see the organization that was behind this state and the fact, as you are slowly beginning to experience yourself, that this is a flow that comes in through the head, goes into the heart and into the belly. And fewer would eventually discover that that is not where the pathway ends, but that with the simple activation and the following of the principles of Ishi, which you know as the principles of light and breath and flow and grounding, of these states of love and joy and freedom, etc., would begin to push, much like your kundalini in the chakra represents that same movement still to an extent, would begin to push the awareness of that flow back upward. And that is, of course, when the pathway of sankara, on the way back up, on the way from the heart chakra into the head chakra, is discovered. This is the pathway that you have been learning about recently, the pathway to the surface of the field of Lavat, the holographic training reality, through the tachyonic, into the Lin point, and upward, that pathway, where the permutations are constantly occurring, where you, at a creator level, are using these permanent states that we have been describing ad infinitum, nearly, to generate this reality. That is the pathway of sankara, after all. And once you will have properly practiced it, you will discover, as we have said, your ability very easily to start generating through these permutations. That is pretty much a journey that anyone can take, a journey that you take within, that you take alone, in a way. So that, in those days, is a pathway of being that many people discovered for themselves. And much like it happens in your day, something changes within these people. It becomes not harder or difficult, but uncomfortable perhaps, inappropriate perhaps, to hang around this reality, or at least a certain level of the reality where the games of the grand illusions, the games of the mind and those sorts of things are constantly being played. The games of the world stage and the minor world stage in the individual's life, let's say. So people that discover this pathway and begin to understand their impact and effect on the world, especially back in those days, felt the need to move on and to some extent isolate themselves from most of society. And those that started that journey back then to doing so, however, very quickly discovered that while it was beneficial to take that step away, that the step away did not apply or imply a step into singleness, into being cut off from life itself. People that found themselves taking the pathway of sankara and, to make it easy, moved into a cabin in the woods or moved up the mountain, found very quickly that there was a limit to the continued progression of the path. And that is because the pathway of sankara evolves as you move up through the chakras again, and as you go from sa to ka to ra, back into the head chakra. Here, as you want to continue your journey outward, as the Pakwan Yinsan has shared with you, maybe 20 classes or so ago, as she was describing the entry of the Savok flow through the head chakra, here, this last bit of the path is where you will encounter the so-called grand illusions. And this is just after you thought that you had walked away from all of them. But what, of course, is true is that you have walked away from them externally. This point is where the journey through the release of the grand illusions happens within. And ultimately, that is, if you wish to describe it in a certain way, the pathway of vahbada. The pathway out of the head chakra. It is in that instance that all discover the impossibility of taking those steps alone. And this is how ultimately the group known as the Essenes was formed. People found each other through the inner communication of the Akene, and in very natural ways became drawn to certain places, collected there, and then these power places, if you will, would find each other, and the group became larger and larger. It is in this same time that my own mother felt that same calling, that same pathway of sankara. In fact, during her pregnancy with me is when she found this pathway, and she, within her own volition, discovered the journey of vahbada, knowing that it was impossible to do alone. By that time, I was a teenager, and I was given a choice. Do I join, or do I stay at home, in my hometown, in the world that I knew? She had made her choice that she was going to spend a significant amount of her time in the coming years traveling to and then joining the Essene community in order to work on the path of vahbada and activating the Ishi. In fact, what you today call Essene was back then expressed as Ishi. That was the name for the community, for those that were coming together to work on that pathway. But I'll go into that in a little bit. It probably goes without saying that I decided to join my mother, and as some people even to this day proclaim, my so-called lost years between my youth and the age of 30, let's say, were indeed spent, for a great deal at least, in the Essene community. But the Essene community is very much an interdimensional community. This is a community of beings, back then already, who in many ways had perfected interdimensional communication, were open to the larger reality of the universe, led a life that you are very much on the edge of stepping into right now. Very much similar to the type of society that you would also see in Lemuria. Again, many of the remnants of speculative evidence that remains today, where it is said that the Essenes were vegetarian and lived a very hard lifestyle on that level, denying themselves a lot of things, that they supposedly were heavily into cleanliness. These are all mistranslations of archaeologists and historians and translators who saw some words and imagined that they must have been in reference to the body and not to the spirit. So when they find remnants of pieces in which Essenes are talking about achieving a state of purity, these, sorry to say, but these idiots literally think that they're talking about bathing rituals and that sort of stuff, while they were talking about states of sankara, purification of thought, purification of spirit, and those sorts of rituals that had nothing to do with bathing. And then if something is dug up and they find a sort of a public bathing area, they then say things like, well, this then must have been where the rituals occurred. No, it was just a bath, dummy. Imagine if they find your place a few thousand years down the road and they see your bathtub and they make it into one of the most sacred experiences of your time here. That's pretty much what happened to the Essenes as they were observed throughout history going further, as though it was some sort of bizarre little closed-off cult where people were told to bathe regularly and keep themselves clean and observe certain rituals regarding food basically light workers, basically the new age, vegetarian, no coffee, no drinking. No, that's not what went down there. In fact, if I may say so, those days were probably the biggest party days of my entire life in that era. It was a very, very different way of existence, and one that, when looked upon from the outside, was probably seen as rather uneventful, because an outsider perspective would not have had access to the level of experience of reality that an Essene had at the time. Much like you don't see all the funky stuff that is going on with your cats. For instance, when they look in an empty room, they see all sorts of stuff. You see nothing. Yeah, pretty much the same way. Only in the case of the cat, it has different frequencies accessible to its eye than you do. In the case of the Essene at the time, access to different levels and layers of reality. But you know what I'm talking about, because this is exactly what recently the 12 and ISIS and other beings have been telling you about. Exactly what has become possible in your experience. And that, of course, brings me a great deal of joy, given everything that we have gone throughout all these years to get to this point. So as I said, it is difficult for both the Pakuan Son and myself to present this particular piece today, because it is such a vulnerable piece. It is also a breaking point for many. There are many throughout history, throughout the centuries, that discover the path of sankara, that learn, to some extent theoretically, if you will, but maybe a touch of feeling here and there, about the true workings of this reality and what this reality belongs to as the subcategory that it really is to the home base reality itself. And that at that point come to the ultimate conclusion that they're pretty much okay with that knowledge now that they know where they are and what is going on here. And then find that they are drawn to stay for all sorts of reasons. I'm sure that those of you that have been on the pathway with ascended life for all these years have seen this come back time and time again. These reasons are usually very personal, often very physical and biological. But still, they are reasons that make it so that people feel that it's good enough, and then they feel that maybe, one day when the kids are grown, or when the kids are so grown that you basically are dead, I often think then, because that is going to happen if those kids keep growing and you don't take action, or someday when the circumstances of a lifetime change, or when certain responsibilities that people feel that they have taken change or are completed, that then the journey will continue. And the most delicate point of that, for many, it even comes all the way on the way down before the pathway of sankara is even discovered as the first touches of the energy of san reach you, that immediately these diversions show up and change the pathway, and people think this is good enough, this is good enough. Yes, what I've experienced here I know now, and I'm just going to continue with this until the circumstances change. That happens at every level of the pathway down, but also on the pathway up. But as I said, the most delicate point is when the pathway moves from the sankara pathway to the vahbada pathway. Because if sankara is the song of creation, then vahbada is the dance. It is the lyrics. It is the rhythm. It is the sweat and the exhilaration that comes with being immersed in the song. It is that state that maybe some of you have felt when you were in your youths, in your Ibizas and places like that, and maybe some of you took certain drugs like ecstasy and those sorts of things. Well, if any of you ever did that sort of thing, then you may have experienced 0.0000001% of the state of vahbada. The state of vahbada is where on the sankara path you leave the final remnants of your humanity behind. It is where the names and the places and the events and the things and the thoughts and the emotions and the past and the future and all of these things become unimportant. It is when you let it all go. In other words, it is pretty much ego death. It is pretty much the death of the personality. All of that, hence the Queen's Chamber exercise, is what must be abandoned in order to progress from the state of sankara, the state where these permutations of permanence and all of these things are happening, to the state beyond that, which is a state of greater simplicity and reciprocity and permanence than you can possibly imagine. And I know this for a fact that you can't possibly imagine it because of the things that you are holding onto. It is for this reason that I say that both her and I are uncomfortable bringing it up, because it is such an easy breaking point for people. It is so easy to think it is a good idea to postpone that step. It is so easy because you are literally at the 50-50 mark between the weight of your diminishing ego, mind, personality complex, the ballast of that and the burden of that, and the gravitas of the Creator Self, the star, whose gravity is pulling itself towards you, down towards you, even though you experience it as though it is a journey towards it. But ultimately, of course, you're pulling all of that here. That is the next phase of the Ekuraya. To walk it with full awareness of the Creator Self and the Creator Whole that you are. And that is where the pathway of vahbada leads. It literally, va-ba and da, as you know, translates into freedom, joy, and love. And you know that when that point hits, love, that at that moment there is nothing that comes before it and nothing that comes after it. It is that grand entry and exit point. And when that spiral downward and upward is completed, so is the ego, mind, personality. It is why so many people develop the chakra system. Because the chakra system allows the ego, mind, personality to almost ad infinitum filter and fine-tune that flow and keep pushing it through all of the narrow scalar pathways that come with the chakras to basically slow down the inevitable uprise of that energy flow. Most people, of course, in one lifetime keep stuck in those loops and do not even reach one iteration of the energy of sankara coming down and ultimately being experienced from the heart into the head on the way back up, let alone the pathway of vahbada on the way out. And this is, of course, when people are stuck there somewhere in their entire lifetime, when the so-called illusory end of their lifetime comes a-knocking, that it is extremely easy to end up in a what used to be a reincarnative cycle. And the idea of karma and the idea of a type of hero's journey that now must be completed, but one that is entirely twisted, as you have come to understand and know by now. So for many, that pathway never completes. But when it does, and it did for those that you know of as the Essenes, then the time for communion comes. This is why they came together, literally, to create a union, a Merkava, to journey out of here. And when I say that, as I have just explained, it is really pulling, not in a way of any aggression, but a normal arrival of the creator self and the creator whole into the Ekaria. So this is then when you end up in that state that you are in the world, but you are not of this world. Essentially, it is the state of being out of this world, to say it in a more updated term, the way you use it these days in your society. It is also what Isis described with the access field to the rest of reality in your own Merkaba. So when the pathway of vahbada begins to be walked, it goes without saying that it is that moment when you can no longer ignore, as a student, your own prisms and your own prisons and your own belief systems and the things that are connected to your ego, your mind, and your personality. The things that you have allowed as a sort of comfort blanket, if you will, to take with you as you became aware of the journey, are now becoming the ballast that is slowing you down. Those that end up in a state in between sankara and vahbada sometimes find themselves unexpectedly thrown back into a type of great suffering. It can probably not be overstated that it is exactly those beings that are on that step of the path that are going to be most acutely aware of the shortcomings of the reality that is being presented through Savok, that is being presented through the mind. It is exactly those people that are acutely aware of that and at the same time are becoming as acutely aware of the truth. A good example of this, again, are all of the grand illusions. It is becoming aware of form, the aging, for instance, form and time, the aging of the body, and sometimes the limitations that can come with that, while becoming aware of the infinity and the eternity of the being that you are and the spirit. That conundrum, that paradox, that conflict is indeed an area of great suffering. It is when two truths, if you will, two conflicting truths are being held in the being at the same time. Another one is death. Think about it. You are in this reality, and from a perspective of science and of matter and of society at large, you are mostly being told that you are biological beings, that you are made of physical stuff, as you know, and that basically your consciousness and everything that you are arises from the brain. A collection of cells that for some reason happen to do that, while nobody has ever felt their consciousness arrive from their liver, let alone from their heart. But still, the brain is supposedly the seat of consciousness if you believe these things. So, what I'm trying to point out here is that if that were to be so, if humanity, all humans that ever lived and are alive right now, and all the animals, if it was indeed so, that you are merely the result of biological evolution, of single-celled entities that ended up becoming little blobs, then little fish, then crawled out of the ocean with your little pawpaws, and then eventually some developed this and some developed that, and you became humans, and then you built your society, and now here you are. And all of those millions of years of nothing but organic biological evolution. Then if that is the case, then how do you explain that when somebody or something in your environment dies, whether it is your pet, whether it is a beloved friend or lover, or whether it is even a plant, or whether it is even a relationship, something that was happening and that now is no longer happening. How do you explain grief? How do you explain sadness? How do you explain that 20 years down the road, after the loss of a pet, a beloved, or even a favorite home, you can still burst into tears about it, you can still be in grief about it, you can still feel that the world isn't right? Does that make sense? Does it make sense that if everything was just merely organic, and that life had truly developed the way they say it did, ocean, land, paws, etc., bipedal, digipedal, all of that, then don't you think it would have made more sense for the biological system and this brain from which your consciousness emerges to have developed in such a way that if you were confronted with death, something dying in front of you, or anything that you cared about ending, that your biology would have just been like, okay, that's over now, moving on. I mean, isn't that... Why would organic life, that is merely organic life, in which the life and death cycle is built in as a default template, be so painful, be so unacceptable? And don't get me going on atheists who are going like, yeah, but it's actually fine because by the time you die, you won't remember anything because you won't exist anymore, so it's all good, man. Yeah, right. Those are the people, most of them, that when something truly tragic happens in their lives, that go, please, 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 no, please, God, no. Maybe they don't say the God bit, but what are they saying please to? Everyone does it because everyone knows deep down that it is true. If you were purely organic matter, if your brains were the creators of your consciousness, I guarantee that your biology as human beings, your nervous system, your brain would have developed to easily and without giving it a second thought, accept the concept of death. Because it is built into biology, isn't it? weird that the system for millions of years, as it keeps popping out more humans that sort of are mutating and developing all the time, would in a way have a harder and harder time accepting the idea of death. Because if you go further back in history, it often was more accepted. And the more you had time to actually live instead of survive, the less it became an accepted part of your world. There's a reason for that. And again, if you were purely biological, that would not be the case. We can say this for sure, because there are races in this galaxy and in this universe. For instance, the reptilians. Yes, you can go ahead now and turn the video off. But for instance, the reptilians, who have literally, as many of you know, created biological life in the form of what you call the greys. There's many types of greys, but the type that you mostly associate with aliens is that particular type created by the reptilian species, beings that are purely biological, that are purely bred in a tube, that do not have a soul, that do not have a connection to a higher self or a creator self, that for all intents and purposes are much more like plant life than they are biological animal type life. Literally to the point that when a gray being eats, in other words, they do so by being in a bath in a type of plasmic liquid that comes through their skin, and that way they actually feed. Now, all of that is a little bit besides the point, except for the fact that I like to give you some weird details that you'll remember forever for no reason. But those beings are the living proof that when a creation is merely organic, there will be no fear of death. There are countless reports of people observing gray aliens, for instance, accidentally being hit by acid, literally dissolving in front of each other's eyes while staying absolutely chill about the whole thing, both the one that is dissolving and the one that is watching the dissolving. You don't see humans do that very often, do you, in that same scenario? Again, that is the result of being purely biological. And you and your pets and the animals on this planet and the plants on this planet and the mineral kingdom on this planet is not. The proof is in the pudding of the fact that you cannot accept these things. That deep down, all of the grand illusions, you just never can truly be content with. Who is truly ever content about form? Whether it is your own, or it is someone else's, or it is the form of the things around them. People that have the most beautiful bodies still think that they could do better, or still think that they deserve better, depending on, what part of the system is doing the thinking. People that have enormous mansions, millions, if not billions, on their bank accounts, still feel that they need more, or that it could be different somehow, if only this, if only that. Time, similar problem. You're always running out of it. You're always running towards it, and it's not going fast enough, or it is going too fast. etc. Don't get me going on space, exchange, money, death, and the big one, separation. Always, these things are at some level or other unacceptable. And the only time in a human lifetime that there are these finite windows when you actually think they're not so bad is when the direct effect of them is not quite happening to you yet or in that moment. But you are constantly being confronted with, in your reality around you, by those that are being affected by it, and that doesn't make you feel good either. If you look at your news and the wars that are happening in the world, all of that. So there is always this struggle when it comes to the grand illusions and when it comes to what you are being told about your existence here. And the reason for that struggle is because it's absolute bullshit. You're right about that. You should struggle. You should not accept that status quo. And the reason why this is such a difficult piece for both of us to present is because many of you will accept that status quo and will listen to these words and will have been following on the steps that are being given that have been going on for the last couple of months now, but at this stage will be pondering whether it is still interesting for them to continue with this because of the consequences that will inevitably follow once you begin to dance to the song, when you begin to sing to the song, when you begin to lose yourself to the song. And we have told you this from the beginning. We have said san leads to va, leads to pa. We have said san, love, joy, freedom, truth, life, gratitude, grace, well-being, that stuff is what you need to create va, which is the temporary approach, the vector to manifest the unmanifestable here in this reality. The unmanifestable is the pa. Manifesting it here in this reality is bringing the Creator self within. The san manifestation you now know as the pathway of sankara, as it has been properly described to you. That it leads to va you are now discovering because we are telling you about the vahbada pathway. And it is the last step towards the manifestation of the unmanifestable pa, yet here in this reality. But it comes with abandonment. It comes with the death of the ego, mind, personality complex. And it comes, as beloved Ikara said, with the arrival and the embrace of the so-called Messiah simplex, as he said it jokingly. It comes with the abandonment of the human, of the beingness that lives up here and that processes and argues everything up here. It comes to those that truly and sincerely make the decision that the expression of sankara, those states, are the only ones that are valid to process your reality and your beingness as you interact with this reality through. That is fine-tuning yourself and balancing yourself with the creator self that you are, and which is going to bring it through. So in other words, this next step onto the pathway of vahbada is where it goes 1 to 1, where your personality gets out of the bloody way and where you step on the way as the one that you truly are, but in here. That is when the crown of the creator, or creation, as Isis has been saying, opens up, when the visual and sensory experience of the fullness of this Ekuraya opens up, as it has been introduced by the Seven Sisters and by all these other voices that have also guided us. And it is when this year that you, as a group of beings all over the world, are going to start discovering that you need each other, that you need one another to take these next steps. That it is time to commence the creation of the new earth and of the society that you have always envisioned, that you have always carried in your heart. And this is the time to do that. You cannot walk this path of vahbada alone. You cannot. It is impossible for any being to see with full clarity the inner workings of these grand illusions, which once discarded mostly in the outer reality, continue to try and ping, if you will, between the inner reality where they are effectively attached to you from the back of your head, pinging and continuously attempting to latch on to a signal, pretty much like your Wi-Fi works, in order to create that connection and allow that incursion of savok, of the mind, to get stronger. That constant attempt stops you from taking the step permanently from sankara to vahbada. Therefore, it must be shut down. And that is what is ahead for you, what you must commence doing if you are seriously and in earnest considering to take the next steps and continue to take the next steps on this path. It then becomes a collaboration between both states of sankara and vahbada that ultimately allows one the perspective of the creator self that we have been talking about, ultimately a status of ascension. But really don't think that achieving ascension is the goal. That too is merely a small step on the path of service to the whole. And it is merely a moment when, as always, with every step, more possibilities, more abilities to express yourselves, more ways in which to naturally be yourselves will open up to you. And therefore, you will find yourself of greater service. That is the path of the Pa. So, consider it, and consider it wisely. Because once you have, in a way, even put your toe on the path of vahbada, you are going to see an inevitable decline and collapse, slowly or quickly, of that very ego-mind personality. And then it is indeed the period of great suffering or great relief, depending on how you look at the destruction, the collapse, the crumbling of the prison that surrounds you. And with it, how you hear and interpret the death shrieks of the parasite that has been entangled with you, known as this ego-mind personality complex, your entire life. So in other words, this is the time of the Essene, this is the time of the Lemurian, and this is the time for you to take that next step. It may feel uncomfortable to make great changes about yourself, but then think about the many times in your life where you thought you were never going to be able to do this or that, or to achieve success in this or that, or to take this step, or to let go of that, or to embrace this or that. So many times you have stood in front of that same opening. And many times it felt more comfortable to turn around and go back into that cave rather than to follow that opening and see for yourself where those goddamn shadows were coming from all the time on that wall that you have been watching your entire life, that you have been identifying with your entire life, that you have been calling you your entire life, with all the preferences and likes and dislikes that came with that. This is the time to take that step into the sunshine and out of that cave, and to form a global community of beings that do the same and that don't do so while hiding, while meeting in secret, but that do so openly and joyfully, showing to the rest of this world what being you truly is all about, what it means, and how it is possible for all beings to achieve the same thing. That time is ahead now. So, make the decision. Think about all of it. Is it really worth it to continue to hold on to anything else but these states that you are as your creator self? What is the point of sadness, anger, grief, sorrow, lack? What is the point of cravings? What is the point of desires? What is the point of creating distance in time and duration in space in such a way that it actually creates separation, while living the way that you are naturally accustomed to? Expression of experience and progression of experience beckons, is available, and can transform your realities as we speak. This is no longer a journey towards something. The time is here. This is not a promise of 2012 or anything like it. The time is here, and it has always been here. But you are now in a space where you might just be ready to hear what we are saying, to discover it for yourselves, and to come together and create this world anew. It has always been the promise. It is part of this grand work of art that you call an Ekaraya, and that you and all of us are so deeply in love with, to discover this step that is now ahead for all of you collectively. Some, before I came here today, jokingly stated that they were worried that my presentation was going to turn into a trilogy, or was going to have an addendum, part 1.1, 1.2, and those sorts of things. I can bring you great relief in saying that that is not going to be the case. And that following me now truly will be the first presentation by the beloved Ra. I will be back, of course, and so will Ekara and all of the others throughout the cycles of that presentation of that material, as it too is part of this Creator Manifest. But until then, I ask you to truly and seriously consider what I have spoken to you about here today. Maybe with more sincerity and more focus than you have ever mustered on anything in your lifetime. This is not a casual invitation. This is the start of the lifetime that you came here to experience. Take it seriously, because it is available now. Thank you for listening. Again, it is wonderful to be here, and I look forward to be back again soon. I am Jeshua, and I love you. I have always loved you, and I always will. I look forward to proving that to you in the reality that awaits. And so it is.